Knowing how to set up and solve a proportion is very important when solving word problems that use proportions. First, we'll read our word problem, identify the important information, and set up the proportion using only the units. Let's try it out. Charlie buys 3 gallons of iced tea for every 12 people coming to his barbecue. He expects 60 people to come to his barbecue. How many gallons of iced tea will he need to buy? The important information are gallons and people. So I set up 2 fractions. First fraction is gallons over people, and the second fraction is gallons over people. I keep the units the same on the tops. I keep the units the same on the bottoms. Next, we fill in the numbers that go with the units. The first fraction shows the comparison between the 3 gallons of iced tea for the 12 people. The second fraction shows X gallons, because we're being asked how many gallons, and 60 people, that's the number of people we need to supply with iced tea. Now, we will use cross multiplication, as we did with our proportions earlier. 12x equals 3 times 60. 12x equals 180. Divide both sides by 12, and we get x equals 15 gallons. So Charlie needs to buy 15 gallons of iced tea in order to have enough to have 60 people at his barbecue. Let's try solving another word problem. First, read the word problem, identify the important information, then set up the proportion using only the units. Janie is planning a trip to Boston. On the map, she sees that 1 inch equals 20 miles. She estimates that Boston is 4 inches from her starting point on the map. About how many miles is she from Boston? We set up our 2 fractions, inches over miles. Both fractions are set up inches over miles. Now we fill in the numbers that go with the units. 1 inch on the map corresponds to 20 miles, first fraction. 4 inches on the map corresponds to X miles. We don't know the miles to Boston. Let's solve using cross multiplication. 4 times 20 equals 1 times X. 80 equals 1X. X equals 80 miles. Janie starts her trip 80 miles from Boston. In our next word problem, I'd like you to see that in the proportion you don't necessarily need whole numbers. You can set up a proportion using decimals or fractions or mixed numbers. Let's try this one. Chris uses 1½ cups of sugar to make 3 dozen sugar cookies. This time, Chris wants to make only 1 dozen cookies. How many cups of sugar should Chris use? Let's identify the important information, cups of sugar and dozen of sugar cookies, and set up the proportion using the units, cups per dozen, cups per dozen. Now we'll fill in the numbers that go with the units. 1½ cups sugar corresponds to 3 dozen cookies. X cups of sugar, how many cups we do not know yet, we'll find out, per 1 dozen cookies. Now we'll use cross multiplication. 1½ times 1, 3 times x. 3x equals 1½ We're going to need to divide by 3. But you know how to do that. We're going to take x, and it equals 1½ divided by 3. So we change 1½ to its improper fraction form, 3/2, so we can divide it by 3. And we know that dividing by 3 could really be written as multiplying by its reciprocal, 1/3. 3/2 times 1/3 equals 3/6. 3/6, that can be reduced. Let's reduce it to 1/2. Just a half cup of sugar for a dozen cookies.